Morning, everyone. Good, good. It's always exciting to get an opportunity to come out here. I had an opportunity to meet Bill many years ago, but before I get to that, I'll tell you a little bit about me, because some of you all may know who I am. Some of you all might be like, I could care less who you are. But but I grew up in Homestead, literally steel mill town. When I graduated, I went all the towns kind of merged, and we created one high school, which was called Steel Valley High School. So I graduated there in the early '90s. I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to play professional football, just like pretty much everybody else who plays football in high school. Ended up getting a scholarship to this school called Eastern Michigan University. I know you all know that powerhouse well, right? So I get there, and all of a sudden, things weren't going well for me. Struggling, sitting down, and then from there, end up playing a little bit. So things started to kind of work around it. I started playing. My name started to be noticed around the country. But then all of a sudden, I get to this point in 1996, and I remember getting a phone call from my mother. And my mother, I pick up the phone, and she's like, "You need to come home." I say, "Mom, what am I coming home for?" I said, "Because I can't drive from Ypsilanti, Michigan to Pittsburgh without knowing what I'm coming home for." So I said, "Mom, just tell me why I'm coming home." I'll pause there for a moment, because in 1996, you didn't have these little things called a cell phone like you do today, right? You had these things called a beeper. Some of you all might be like, "What the heck is a beeper," right? That beeper is a little black device that you call the number, and it dial tone, and then all of a sudden you leave the 7 digits that you want this person to call you back from. So I'm like, "Mom, I don't have a cell phone." I said, "You need to tell me why I'm coming home." She said, with the deepest swallow that I've ever heard in my life, she said, "Charlie, your sister's been shot and killed." I'm like, "What?" So I literally get on the road, and I'm driving, and I'm flying down the road. It's 5 hours to get there. Driving down the road, I get past Youngstown. I get pulled over by the state trooper, and he said, "Mr. Batch," he said, "what are you speeding?" I tell him the story. He says, "You never seen me continue on with your journey." So I get to Pittsburgh, and I get down to the steel mill town, get across this bridge in Homestead. Now, the steel mills have shut down, so it's pitch dark when I'm coming across this bridge. So I get across this bridge, it's 8th Avenue. You go up this hill 3.5 blocks and make a left on a road that I'll never forget. And it's called East Laurel Way. And at this point, when I get there, I see yellow tape because I knew something happened, but I didn't know what happened. And at this point, I get around and I walk and I see a spot and there's blood, so I know this is surreal. So I go to my house 3 blocks away, and all my boys are waiting on me. They're like, "Charlie, we know who did this. Let's go get them." And I'm like, "I need to know what happened. You have to tell me what happened." So, of course, if you know codes of the street, they don't talk. So for the first 48 hours, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So I finally get the information, and the information basically goes like this. My sister was walking down the street from her friend's house. She got caught in crossfire between rival gangs, and the guy that she was with used her as a body shield. Danielle was 17 years old. She never had an opportunity to live life. And at that moment, I said if I was ever in position to give back, I would. How was I going to do that? So I get back to Eastern Michigan. So I'm now setting out my goals because I didn't know what to do. I'm ready to retaliate. But if I did what I wanted to do, you would have no idea who Charlie Batch was. And at that point, I get back up there. I said, I'm going to do something in my family that's never been done. I'm going to graduate college. So I did that in 1997. And at that point, I said, number 2, I said, I'm going to put myself hopefully in position that one of these 32 teams will know who Charlie Batch is. So as I put all this time and energy to do that, my name was called in the 1998 draft in the 2nd round by the Detroit Lions. And at that point, I'm playing. Things are going well on the field because I'm a starter as a rookie in the National Football League. But at that point in 1999, at the end of that season, beginning January 1999, I now wanted to create a foundation. Didn't know how to go about doing that. So I ended up going out there, creating this foundation that was called Best of the Batch Foundation. Started doing some one-off programs that were in Detroit. I now shifted that back because I had an opportunity to play for the Steelers in 2002. Thought I would only be there for 1 year, so I wanted to create a program that was going to be able to sustain and hopefully create and build that legacy. So we started a basketball league. Didn't know how to do it. Just we're going to create a basketball league because I want to get girls and boys involved. So we had 125 kids, 25 volunteers, and we created this whole basketball league with all the implications of making sure that we stayed and focused on education. Now, it's easier for us to now get kids to come over and play basketball versus saying, "Hey, Meet me in the library. We're going to read a book. Be lucky to get 20 kids, right? So we started doing that. We had 125 kids. By year 2, we were at 300 kids. And we're now 365 kids year round. In 15 years, we just finished our 16th year with the basketball league. I've only had one fight. Just imagine one community coming to another coming in, all into the city of Homestead. I've had one fight. That was 2 little girls fighting over a little boy that they claimed that they were going with. So I'm like, if that's the worst thing that can happen, you want to know what? I'll take this all day. But in the meantime, I'm trying to figure out ways to grow this. How do you grow it? Because you have these kids, but now how can you implement that and figure out ways to now get them to focus on education? So in the community, people are saying, hey, there's a lot of similarities that you are doing and this guy by the name of Bill Campbell is doing. So I'm like, okay, but I've never met Bill before. You have to tell me what I'm supposed to say. Never met him. So I come down this bridge, and that bridge that I was telling you about as I rode home from college, I get across this bridge, and I pick up the phone, and I'm just saying, you want to know, I'm going to call Bill. Hopefully, when I call, I leave a message, and he never calls back, and I can say I always tried. So I pick up the phone. They say, Secretary's Debbie. She'll pick up the phone. I say, hey, Miss Debbie, this is Charlie Batch from Homestead. She says, one moment, please. I was like, what do you mean, one moment, please? She's like, no, it's all of a sudden, this guy gets on the phone. He says, Charlie Batch, how the hell are you? And I'm like looking at my phone, and I'm like, I'm fine. How are you, sir? And he's like, Charlie, I've heard a lot about you. He started running off my stats. He said, I'm familiar with you, who you are. I know what you're doing in the community. I want to help. How can I do that? He said, because I'm out here in the valley, but I can't do what you're doing. He said, I know the impact that you're having on kids. I know these kids are following you. How can I now be a resource? I said, Bill, I just need you to support me. Not financially, I need you to support me because I want people to believe that you believe in me. He says, Charlie, I'm with you. So at that moment in 2002, we started growing. We started doing some programs. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is amazing, because every year he would come in, and he would always come in, and he would walk through our foundation office. We would always sit down, and as he was the chairman of our board, he said, Charlie, what do we need to do next? Tell me what we're going to do. And I throw it out there. He says, okay, here's the plan. Let's make it happen. And at that point, we started increasing our numbers to where now we're at a point where we service 3,800 kids annually. So when we started working together, Bill was doing one thing. We started collaborating, doing a lot of different projects. And in the community and where we're at, there's now a myth that he's put in $30 million of his own money. I don't know if that's true or not, but all I know is I see the results that are there. And he selected me. He said, Charlie, no, you're going to be the guy that leads this charge. He said, Charlie, what do you have next? I said, actually, Mr. Campbell, I said, he said, no, Mr. Campbell's my father. You call me Bill. I said, okay. He says, what do you want to do next? I said, we're going to expand our foundation office. We're busting out of the seams. We're going to grow this. And he says, Charlie, how are you going to do this? I put this plan into place. He says, okay. He said, Charlie, count me in for $250. I said, that's great. I said, we can go ahead and I can work with the $250 and we can do this. He says, fuck you mean? And I said, no. I said, I'm going to take the $250 and we're going to do this. He said, I didn't say $250. I said $250. He said, you start it and you go out there and raise it. You think you could raise $7 million, you go do it because here's the first $250. I'm like, wow. This is a challenge. This is really a challenge. Because 3 years ago, he presented that opportunity. And then here we are now in this next quarter getting ready to break ground on a 22,000 square foot expansion in our foundation building. It was important at that moment because he always challenged me. He always said, Charlie, what's next? What are you going to do? You're impacting kids, but I want you to personally make an investment in yourself. He said, I'm not satisfied with where you are. He said, all I'm telling you is, and I've seen it a bunch of times, that NFL, when you hear it and it's a cliche, it's not for long. How are you building yourself? How are you investing? How are you growing in yourself? And at that point, I'm thinking about, I didn't know what he meant. But he said, if you're going to tell these kids to do one thing, you have to continue to go out there and be that example. So last year at this time, I didn't mention it. But prior to that 6 months, my wife says, Charlie, that's great that you're out of the NFL. We can kind of do these things, but you need the next step. And remember that conversation that Bill had with you. I said, well, what was that? He said, always continue to educate yourself. I said, I am. I'm doing one-off programs and I'm doing this. He says, no. So my wife says, I'm enrolling you in school. You're going back to get your master's. I said, okay, well, when does it start? She said, it starts Saturday. This was on a Wednesday. So I went back and we did a 10-month accelerated program in organizational leadership at Robert Morris University. When I stood here a year ago, I was halfway through it. I knew football season was going to start, and I knew that I saw that light at the end of the tunnel. Now, the Steelers, they play prime time. There was 4 out of 5 games that they played at 8:30 at night. So here I am doing commentating, doing foundation work in the morning, commentating with the Steelers game, trying to write a paper because online, if it's not due at midnight, if it's not turned in, you get a big red flash on that paper or on that website that lets you know you're late on your paper. So I was trying to work through that. And in December of last year, I actually received my master's. So I look at that and I say, man, this is continuing because I remember that conversation that I had with Bill, that he's telling you to continue to grow, invest in yourself. And it doesn't matter at what point that you are in your life, you can continue out there and continue to do it. So I looked at that and I continued to do that and continue to challenge. So in May, I actually graduated. So in May, I'm looking back and thinking I don't need to walk. And I'm like, no, you have people who are watching this. The kids that you are now talking to every single day, they need to see that moment. And for me to walk across that stage May of 2018, it was an achievement that I really look at that because it's not one of those honorary doctorates that you get when they just give you a piece of paper. It was something to say, I've earned that. So I was able to do that, and I'm excited as we continue to do that. But more importantly, as we move through this, Bill was a guy that always challenged you. He always believed in you. And I just looked at it, and I wear that with a badge of honor because he saw something to me that I didn't necessarily see at a very young age. Here I was probably 5 or 6 years in the NFL, and I'm thinking I'm going to play 10 years and I'm done. I'm thinking the foundation is going to run 10 years and I'm done. But here we are 19 years, still able to make that impact and service in 3,800 kids. So I'm humbled by that. But I remember one conversation with Bill, and Eileen may not necessarily remember it because she was conversating with everybody who enjoys her presence when she comes to the homestead. But I remember getting inducted into the Steel Valley Hall of Fame. And this is a big honor back in our hometown. And I remember coming in, and I'm feeling kind of down because the week before we played the Cleveland Browns. And in Pittsburgh, that rivalry between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, you cannot lose that game. So we go to Cleveland, and I'm starting, and everybody like, Charlie, you're starting. Ben's not playing. It's not a problem. We go there, and I have probably the worst game of my career. We turned the football over 1 time, 2 times. We turned the football over 8 times in the National Football League. How are you a professional team and turn the ball over 8 times, right? But we figured out a way to do that. And I was leading that charge. And all of a sudden, I'm standing there. And being a professional is accepting responsibility, even though you know things totally aren't your fault. Accepting responsibility even when you know things totally aren't your fault. So I'm standing there in front of the media, and the media is all crowding around my locker. And they're like, Charlie, tell me what you thought. How did you lead the team to an 8 turnover performance? And I'm thinking to myself at that point, man, I don't know. But what I really wanted to say was, listen, I turned the football over 3 times. Those fools turned it over 5. You need to go ask them. But I couldn't. I had to stand there and accept responsibility. So I accepted that responsibility, and all of a sudden, here I am standing, and I'm like, wow, this is crazy. So my wife is driving home, and she's like, Charlie, I don't know what the heck happened, but all I know is you need to figure this out. We now play the Baltimore Ravens next week, and I'm not sure if Ben Roethlisberger is playing. Well, 2 days before that, Friday night, I get inducted to the Hall of Fame. So I'm there, didn't really want to go, but Bill was coming in because he said, I'm only coming in for you. So we get there. So me and my wife walks in. He walks over there. So my wife talks to Eileen. They're hugging. And all of a sudden, Bill pulls me to the side. And I know some of you all who were here last year, you heard this story. Bill pulls me to the side, and he says, I don't know what the fuck you got going on, but I can't sit here and continue to brag about the Steelers. You're playing like horse shit. You need to get your shit together. And I'm like looking, and I'm kind of looking, and everybody kind of looking. I'm like, wow, Bill's yelling at me, but I'm trying to keep it together because everybody's looking like, yeah, Bill, good to see you. Yeah, this is great. So we get there, and I needed that because I always had somebody he was that person on the outside of the football world that I really leaned toward for advice. And when he said that and he broke that game down as far as the mistakes that I made, I was like, this guy pays attention. And he broke that game down, and we actually go to Baltimore the next week. So I'm sitting there, and I'm still feeling down. So at this point, I'm like, I already had the conversation with Bill. I'm now going to have this conversation with my mother. And my mother, I'm saying, picking up the phone, I said, Mom, I'm feeling a little down. You need to tell me, give me a little boost, pickup booster. And she says, Charlie, she said, I've watched you play this game for 31 years. Better yet, National Football League for 15 years. She said, but there's no way in hell you're going to Baltimore and you're winning today. And hung up. So I'm mad right now, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm throwing my phone. I'm mad. The players are like, man, this is great. Oh, Charlie's ready to play this game. And I'm like, no, my mom doubted me. That's why I'm kind of pissed off right now. But it got to the point where that added motivation from my mother to with Bill. And it was just a combination to really, I'll show you this highlight here, that this is the result of that conversation 2 days later with Bill. You put that up.
At 6-5, Pittsburgh headed to Baltimore with a patchwork offense, but a steel resolve.
Wraparound draw handoff. And bouncing it out to the left is Ryan. Touchdown, Pittsburgh! Jonathan Dwyer picks up his first touchdown rushing of the season.
The Ravens had won 15 straight at home, but the Steelers overcame long odds and a 10-point deficit.
And that is a catch by Heath Miller, reaches for the pylon. And they call it a touchdown.
One more time and win it. Chuck, one more time. It's all here right now. It's all here right now.
The Steelers had never beaten the Ravens with Roethlisberger sidelined. But with the score tied at 20, the 37-year-old batch was 5 for 5 on a drive that set up the winning field goal.
And the Steelers can now let the clock wind down and bring on Sean Sweezum. Sean Sweezum, he's 23 of 24.
Man, snap it, hold it, and protect it. I ain't worried about 6.
The snap is down. Sweezum's kick is on its way. That kick is good. And the Pittsburgh Steelers upset the Baltimore Ravens. And how about Charlie Batch?
Phenomenal. Coming back after last week's game, winning this football game.
The Steelers were 7-5 and getting their starter back.
That was a moment right there that always is embedded in my mind with Bill, because I remember that conversation 2 days prior to. He had ways to impact you that you had no idea. He's seen things that you didn't see in yourself. But to see where he was at, not only in the football field, but to be able to now execute that off the field is something that I always cherish and I always want to go out there and continue to live that legacy and build that legacy that Bill was able to provide. Because if you come into Homestead, there's a lot of things in Homestead, but there's a lot of things that had the Campbell name written on it. And he was one of those guys that didn't necessarily want the accolades for it, but he wanted guys that can go out there and execute, and he chose me to do that. One final story that I have with Bill. Here is an opportunity. He walked through my foundation office. So he walks through, and he's like, okay, I like it, but I don't love it. And I said, well, what do you mean you don't love the computer lab? He says, I only like it because you don't have enough Macs that are involved in our computer lab. And I said, well, if there just happens to be a knock on the door, you want to know what? I'll accept whatever happens. And at this point on Dr. Seuss Day, I go out and read to about 10 to 15 different schools. So I'm walking around with my Dr. Seuss hat on, my tie, like I'm really Dr. Seuss out. And all of a sudden, there's an 18-wheeler parked in front of my building. And I look at my wife and I say, did you order anything? Because I know you do a lot of shopping when you're sleeping. I said, but this is a bit excessive. And she says, Charlie, she says, I have no idea what that is. So we stop as we are on the way to the other elementary school. And all of a sudden, the guy, I said, yes, sir. I said, I'm Charlie. What do you have? He says, I was told to deliver these items by a guy by the name of Bill Campbell. I'm not really sure who he is, but Bill says, You work here every day. You'll be here. I probably won't have to stay any longer than an hour. I said, well, yes, I'm here. And he backs his 18-wheeler up. We open up the 18-wheeler, and there's 40 Mac computers, there's 40 iPads, there's 40 laptops that are all delivered into the building. And we convert this into an Apple, basically an Apple store for the kids. And we opened that up. And I call him and I said, Bill, thank you. He said, you don't need to thank me. He said, this is all about the kids. He's like, you go out there and continue to execute. He said, what we do is we try to push these kids beyond their expectations. And quite frankly, sometimes you have to just remove the box. And with the kids that we are dealing with, we have to remove that box. We have to continue to go out there and push these kids beyond their expectations. That's who Bill was. That's who he was. And he was a living example of that. And I don't know what I can do from my end to help you all, but whatever it is, as you go out there and you learn this and through your education, you earn it through your labor, never forget to return it back to your community. That's what I try to do. That's who I try to emulate myself after Bill, because he was a living example and he was a living proof of that guy who gave back to his community. I'll pause there for one moment and I'll open it up for questions if anybody has any questions for me. Yes. Well, I think number one, you have to stick with what your mission is. And our mission, we're an educational foundation. And you can't waver off of that, because if you start going and saying, yeah, we're education, we're now this, we're that, people will stop funding. So we've been able to now meet with people where eventually they were sponsors, and we eventually turned them over to become partners. So being in Pittsburgh, it just allowed me the opportunity to sit down, meet with these guys. January, we spend the whole month meeting with our partners so we can execute what the rest of the year looks like. But we have a dedicated staff. We have over 400 volunteers who actually help make this happen. So this is that's important for us to continue to do. But relationships are key as you continue to build, because ultimately you're going to ask people for money, and they have to believe in you to be able to fund that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the things that are, as it relates to transition, the one thing that I knew I had to work on was listening. When you sit back, and I'm so used to being out front, and as a quarterback, everybody's listening to what I'm saying. But there were times that I had to sit back and listen, and sit back and figure out what people's concerns were. And it was a challenge for me, because I wasn't used to doing that. But I knew that was a weakness that I had to work on, and then just continue to hear people out. And one of the things that we have is, we don't care where great ideas come from. We just want to go out and execute it. We don't care who gets the credit. And that's something that we believe within our organization. So it allows people a voice to be able to share without getting, contradicted on the other side. So we just continue to build and continue to do that. Hold on one second. On that video that you saw, there was a holder there. I don't know if you know this, but there was a guy by the name of Drew Butler that was on this team. He's actually a part of this. I don't know if you know who this guy is, but this guy was our punter on the Steelers as well. So Drew, great job. Appreciate it. So I'm telling you. That's my guy, Drew Butler, man. So if you don't know him, please get a chance to introduce yourself to him. He's a great person. Yes, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and a lot of us go through that. It doesn't matter what phase you are, whether that's just graduating college or you play 15 years. There's always a transition process that happens. And sometimes there's this thing called a separation anxiety, where we kind of slip into that depression. I had that same thing, but the good part for me is my wife. She's a clinician and with a background in psychology. So she allowed me to slip into that separation anxiety, but we also had arguments because I felt that she was using me as a case study. It was not easy. I've been with my wife for 16 years. So we got to an argument. I'm like, man, this is really going to challenge our relationship. And we worked together in the foundation. So it really was tough when you wake up in the morning, you see her. The only time that you're away is when we drive. We get to the building and I see her for 8 hours. It's hard to have dinner and saying, how'd your day go, honey? Challenge, right? So as players, I work with NFL players that way to help them transition away from the game. But when you get to that point of me being in the NFL, it didn't matter at what point. So at that year 5, I started to now take it upon myself to start investing in myself. And when I say that, the NFL provided entrepreneurship classes. That happened because, so I waited on somebody. I waited on a friend, teammate to say, we're going to take this class together. Well, at the 11th hour, that person canceled out. So I said, never again would I wait on somebody else to do this. So at that point, I started to now look at those classes. So the NFL at that point, I took classes at Wharton. I took classes at Harvard. I took classes at Kellogg, Northwestern. I took classes here at Stanford. I took classes at Notre Dame. I finished classes at Bowling Green. So I took advantage of all of those opportunities, but at the end of it, you only got a certificate. And that was one of the reasons why my wife challenged me. And she said, okay, you're doing all of these good things, but you need to now go out there and get that degree. And that was important for her to challenge me to do that. But I always try to think about what that next step was. No matter if I was in, so it's a little different because you're in college and didn't get the opportunity maybe at the professional level, but you still go through some of those things in that separation anxiety to now, what is that kick? What is that push that's going to get you over the hump? My wife was that key that pushed me to get over that hump. And if it wasn't for her doing that, I couldn't tell you that I'd be standing here as strong as I am now. And Eileen knows my wife. She knows she's a feisty thing. She is. And anytime, when you get to that point, it's tough, but I thank her for that. I know it's a long answer, but it's hard for me to put myself in your particular situation. All I can tell you is what happened with me. Yep. Yes. Yeah, I think for me it was a little bit of everything. But if you say yes all the time, you start to possibly run into those struggles because eventually, when you say yes, the next ask is, can you invest in this? Can you now use your own money to do that? And you run into some of those things. You kind of stretch yourself thin. There was times that I stretched myself thin, and there were people, because of the relationships that I had, allowed me to now pivot and kind of refocus back to what I wanted to do. Growing up in Pittsburgh, playing for the Steelers, I had the best job in America. It's the best temporary job in America. So when I looked at that, I was like, okay, now what do I want to do? And I had a lot of family to try to take advantage of those situations when I was at home. And I knew Pittsburgh was going to be home for me. So it was a little different from that perspective. But I think when you look at those opportunities, it's about building your network, coming to events like this. This is why I love coming, because you all give me that breath of fresh air. Because as I take it back into the fourth quarter and get ready for the following year, it's like, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do and what the next steps are. But it's just trying to figure that out. For me, I knew I wanted to do the foundation. I knew it was going to be broadcasting afterwards. So it's just something that I kind of had a general idea of what I wanted to do. And some of you all might hear me on that broadcasting, but actually, if you, I don't know if you're a Steeler fan or not, but if you're a football fan in general, on Saturday at 4 o'clock, if you turn on the NFL Network, you'll hear my voice as I'm commentating the game. So if you're not familiar with the way that it works, but if you're the home team in the preseason, they take the home team broadcast and I'll play that nationally in the NFL Network. So you'll be able to hear me on Saturday. You'll be able to hear me next Thursday. So hopefully my voice isn't as annoying when you hear my voice coming across that screen, but at least you can now put a name with the face as far as who's broadcasting. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, not a problem. Yeah, I think a lot of it is we steer on the education because we're able to play a lot off of that. And it doesn't matter if you can build a relationship with Dick's Corporation, Walmart, a hospital system, whatever it is, we can always play off of that educational piece. And for us to be able to do it, like just last week, we packed and we passed out 2,800 school supplies, backpacks and school supplies, where we partner with Walmart and actually funded a $25,000 grant for the foundation. So it's relationships. So now you're able to tell those guys, what the vision is, what you're looking to accomplish throughout the year, and that's kind of how we play off of that educational piece. But we don't use sports, and the reason why we don't use sports is because there are so many other organizations out there that are doing sports. Most people aren't funding football camps and those type of things that people are doing, but we always use that as the draw. And I'm a big believer that sports brings communities together. If you don't believe that, think about this in Pittsburgh. If you're a Pittsburgh fan or just a football fan, when you win a Super Bowl, there's a parade. In Pittsburgh, they had 250,000 people downtown Pittsburgh to celebrate a sporting event. Not once, but twice. All we do is break that down into smaller communities, and we now use that. So we use sports as a draw and then say, oh, by the way, if you want to play basketball, you need to read a book and you need to attend 4 mandatory study halls. And the kids look at you like you're crazy. Well, I don't have to do this. This is the summer. Well, we know that this may be the only book that these kids read throughout the course of the summer. Now we can identify maybe some of these kids have reading challenges. So we can now help the guidance counselors out when these kids go back to school. So that's our way of tricking them out a little bit to try to get these kids to think they're doing one thing, but now we're trying to accomplish it at the back end. So that's just kind of what we do. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think, well, obviously they want to see who your board is. And when they look immediately at that, they want to see the financials. And for us, we've been around now for 19 years, and we have a $500,000 budget. This will increase to 725, 750 with the new building that's coming in. But it's just a way of understanding that these pieces are in place. And I think when you have the longevity, it allowed us to now go out there and ask for that particular funding. So it just depends on who it is and what they're talking about. But if I feel like if I can get a sit-down meeting with you and explain what we're doing throughout the year, I think that it betters that and give you an opportunity to come see what we're doing, allows us to now separate ourselves from other organizations. Yeah, I think for us, one of the biggest tools that we use is LinkedIn. I don't know if you have LinkedIn. If you don't, you should get it because a lot of people now are able to now look at their profile and they see a lot of the things that we're doing. And I was able to build a lot of relationships because when they look on the actual profile, they'll see Charlie Batch. But then they're like, is this really you? And I'm like, yes, it is. What's going on? And then we start the conversation that way. So that allowed us to continue to build those relationships that way as well. So it's not easy. It's challenging. And of course, asking people to volunteer their time when they're not getting paid, that's tough. That is really tough. For 16 of those 19 years, we ran on a volunteer base or as a volunteer-based organization. Over 400 volunteers. So when people understood that we weren't paying people, then it was challenges at the beginning, but if your kid is involved, why wouldn't you want to be involved as a parent? So we were able to now use that as leverage, and now that our numbers grew. So we have 13 different programs that we run throughout the calendar year. If you want to know what we do throughout the calendar year, you can go to batchfoundation.org. You'll get an idea of what we do, and if there's anything that I can help with, please don't hesitate to ask. I saw one more hand possibly. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I think for me, using that motivation was I didn't want to sit in a jail cell the rest of my life. That's the easiest answer that I can give you. Because I know if I did what I wanted to do, I probably have 25 years. I probably would be sitting there with about 6 more left if I did that. So I just knew that was something that that I didn't want to do. And I just remember a quote. It's by Martin Luther King, and it's not where you are. It's not how you stand during during challenge and controversy. It's not how you stand during comfort and convenience, but it's how you stand during challenge and controversy. And I just remember that quote, and I'm sitting there like, wow, that's something that I really want to. What do I want to do with my life? And I didn't want to sit behind a jail, and that was it. That was kind of the motivation. So one thing that I'll leave you with, I know we're running out of time, is a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's a quote that says, "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail." I can't sit up here and tell you what it's going to take for you to become a 15-year NFL veteran. All I can tell you is there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And as I sit back and you heard Dan and he talked about the founders to the down to the entrepreneurs, the founders, sometimes people don't always see your vision. You have to go out there, you have to see them. Dreams are nothing more than plans awaiting action, and sometimes you may be the only person that can see your vision. You go out there and accomplish those goals, whatever that may be in your life, and if there's anything that I could do, please don't hesitate to reach out. But as I sit back and look at this, and football has been great, there's only been one person that's been born and raised in Pittsburgh that played for the Steelers and have 2 Super Bowl rings. I can't make this up. You all have Google. You can go out there and verify it if you need to. But it's important, man. You all are here for a reason. Some of you all may know why you're here. You came back because of what happened last year. Some of you all are new to this event. But right now, use the people in the room. They're here to help you, and they genuinely care about your success and how it's going to help you move forward. That's why I'm here, because I believe in what you all are doing. And I know the common denominator is Bill and why we're here. But I just appreciate everything that he's done for me in my life, everything that he's done for the city of Homestead, and everything he will continue to do, because I'm sitting there trying to build that legacy and help create that legacy that he founded many years ago. So whatever I can do to do that, I am here. Miss Eileen, love you. I'm here, and I appreciate you. Thank you.